Hello and welcome to Liquid New Hampshire. I am on today with my guest AJ Kierstead from the New England Take and a frequent contributor to New Hampshire Talk Radio. We're going to talk today about. I was looking for a good subject for us to talk about because I know you're a New England commentator, and I wanted to talk to you because I know that you talk about New Hampshire specific issues. But because we might have sort of a partisan divide between us, I thought we might talk about somewhere we agreed, maybe. So I thought we'd talk about some sort of cancel culture type stuff and identity politics type stuff today. How are you feeling about that, AJ?
Hey, that works for me. I'm up for whatever.
I just want to tell anybody in my audience to absolutely check you out. You were one of the first people I found when I was looking for New Hampshire specific media. Between you at the New England Take and $100 plus mileage, their podcast, that's been my resource for New England specific news or New Hampshire specific news, I suppose.
Yeah, it's been an interesting landscape the last few years, especially coming out of COVID. Definitely check out anything the Granite, the New Hampshire Granite State Media Collaborative. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. They do great work over there. They work with various traditional outlets and online outlets around the state. I mean, in general too. I mean, if you're looking for what's going on with government specifically, I mean, nhjournal.com does a great job. Michael Graham. And then also if on the which definitely conservative outlet, that one. Very straightforward with that. And the other side is also newhampshirebulletin.com. They've got straight up awesome journalists there, but they also have a left-leaning opinion section that gives you a different perspective. A lot of their stuff on the opinion side is more national, but they do get a periodic local based opinions. But yeah, there's not that many like commentator outlets. I mean, Granite Grok, definitely if you're a traditional conservative guy, that's the place to look. I don't always necessarily agree with those guys. I'm more libertarian when it comes to some of my political philosophy, but it's an interesting landscape that's expanding. I jumped in, I went full-time independent last year. I was previously on WKXL with a regular show and was with the outlet for many years as a side job. So it's been fun kind of playing the commentator space.
Yeah, so you've been involved in this. How long have you been involved in this, by the way?
Well, in general, I did student journalism when I was at Franklin Pierce University down in Ringe. I graduated in 2010, and as a side gig, I did some board op stuff over at WKXL, which is a AM FM radio station here in Concord, very local, independently owned. Just helping out Chris Ryan, who was the primary host at the time, doing some new media stuff and engineering, and did their website. And back in 2021, well, for like 6 years before that, executive produced Granite State of Mind, which is a local music show. When that show, what's that?
I've heard that actually.
Oh yeah,
Granted,
yeah. Rob Azevedo is a great guy. He's a total character. He's now he continues to do the show down in Manchester's community radio station. Um, when that show was removed from the schedule back in early 21, it's like, I got a little time. Maybe I'll do my own show, and that's where I kicked off New England Take as a weekly radio show, for geez 2 years almost, a little over 2 years. I did it, and the and it was fun. It was a lot of work to fill 45 minutes every hour, and it was really getting really hard for me to do it with that schedule because I was also the morning newscaster there for 4 or 5 years leading up to that also up
right.
until when I left last year. So I was getting up at 5 o'clock every morning doing reading the newscast that would air every hour um and then just I started to do a morning broadcast for a year that was all pre-recorded stuff before I left there, which is fun. It got me involved with whatever is going on in the latest news, but whew, that was a rough schedule because that was my side job because I have a full-time employment that I would get up at 5 o'clock. I'd record till 5:45, 6 a.m. somewhere in that ballpark, and get ready for the day with a kid. My kid's 10, so it's got the morning routine with all that stuff too. So it was a lot, and so this has been fun to go independent last September because I can kind of do whatever schedule I want. I've gotten into writing columns. I get to do short videos. I get to do 5 minute recordings, or I could do a
Yeah,
45-minute podcast if I feel like it.
absolutely. No, that's great to have that versatility. I have you on today because I also have full-time job and because 5th of July, so I've got the vacation. And I thought actually I spent yesterday in a pretty interesting way. I spent yesterday with a group called the Platypus Affiliated Society. I have one of them on as a guest at some point. They're an interesting group because they're leftists, but they're staunch defenders of the Constitution and of the founding fathers.
Oh,
They're
that's rare.
critical of the idea that like the founding fathers, oh, they were slave owners, don't take anything they have to say seriously. So I had the privilege of spending the day with wigs on. We got dressed up in real nerdy wigs around a pool, and we read founding fathers like revolutionary quotes to one another, and actually talked about the ideas of the founding fathers. Which I thought was a very traditional
Mm.
sort of a way to spend the 4th of July.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's very rare to see a fairly left-wing organization that still upholds the Constitution nowadays, which I think is very unfortunate. I think it's essential that we have a common language and structure for our society, and that's where I really fall on the more the conservative end of things. Is that especially is I think that's essential. So I'll have to look into that group because that's super interesting.
I agree, and I also think the when discussions about this come up on the left, I feel like it's always too broad, and I feel like this is one of the many issues that I've seen drive cancellation sometimes, where I'm going, well, come on, guys, calm down. Like Hamilton, for example, right? When that musical came out,
Mm.
that's a fiercely liberal musical. I don't think any conservatives are going to that like, oh yeah, this is my shit.
Yeah, they say they watch it in spite of it.
Exactly, exactly. And you go to Hamilton, and there was two groups of people who were very, very angry at Hamilton, right? There were the groups of people who were angry that the founding fathers were black now, when that's not historically accurate, right? They're like, oh, why did you cast black people? That's not historically, they weren't really black, you know? And then there's a group of people who were angry that they're sort of whitewashing the slave owning part of the founding fathers by saying anything positive at all about. And so I feel like this play that I think did a good job sort of explaining our founding, while also just being a very good musical, it got canceled from both ends of the spectrum to some degree. I think it's
In my opinion, the left has a root cause issue at hand that has especially blown up over the last 20 years, where the progressive movement as a whole is a revolutionary movement, where they're looking to upend everything. Like the wokeism is an extension of that. Like we can dive into that aspect of it later, but I mean, there's a fundamental issue where the revolution doesn't stop. The revolution started on very good terms during the civil rights movement. Amazing. I think that there was some laws that probably don't need to be on the books anymore, but needed to be on the books back then because we needed to make a change so that African Americans, Black people in general, just were able to be put into our society properly. Stuff like that. Yeah, 100%. Awesome. And that needed to come from the left. What we the socially left. Let's just put it that way. We won't talk about politically left. That's a totally other ball game. Um, and and then continuing on into gay rights and acceptance of people who are homosexual, all that sort of stuff. It's which is great. It's like I'm very libertarian when it comes to that stuff. Like I think they should have there should be equal rights when it comes to marriage because it's a legal document and there's aspects of the legality of those relationships is really important for them to be able to function appropriately in society, whether it's end of life, whether it's medical, whether it's benefits, things like that. I think it's essential. I disagree with the nature of how Obergefell was decided, but I agree with the outcome. Like I believe it's
that's gay
thing we
marriage,
need.
Birchfell, right?
What's that?
Is Birchfell gay marriage? What's Birchfell?
Yeah, that was the U.S. Supreme Court decision on gay marriage saying it's legally required, and it wasn't forced. which is great. I mean, there was this one wacko down south. I can't remember. I don't even remember. Maybe it wasn't even down south. Maybe it was more in the Midwest. Who was a town clerk and refused to offer gay couples licenses for marriage, and it was enforced, which is awesome. The thing is, the revolution doesn't stop. So it needs to keep going. And the if when you start having escalations when it comes to the magnifying glass in our current society, it causes problems. So we didn't. I have an op-ed that was in the Monitor. I'm hoping the union leaders can be picking up soon. Like we didn't end up with the orange middle finger for no reason.
Right, right.
Like Trump is a mirror and a reflection of everything that the activist left has been pushing for. And guess what? It's a two-way street. You're going to end up with populism to the extreme on both sides if the revolution doesn't find a focus. If there is no individual focus, which in my opinion,
Kind
we're
of.
pretty damn liberal society, in my opinion, where we accept a lot. There's always going to be people that disagree, but the nature of how our system works is pretty open for the most part, for better or worse.
Right.
And they got to point the figurative gun at something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you're right. I think it's interesting that you brought up the idea that a core part of it is change, right? A core part of it is change because I was just talking to a group of people yesterday about different political theories and how different people explain the right versus the left. And some people's explanation, the way they do it, a broad definition of right and left, is that the right wants to quite literally conserve, right? It's let's change more slowly, maybe. Whereas the more liberal center is let's change. The way she put it was let's change, but I don't want to give up too much property for it. Was the way she put it, right? But then on the far left, it's let's change everything, kind of no matter what the cost.
Yeah, it's kill all societal norms for essentially no reason. If there's a lot of people, I'm not, once again, we're generalizing because we're talking about theory here. I think the political theory of the progressives are the like even coming down to marriage at all, like why would you want to have a single partner? What's the value in that? When the conservatives turn around and say, "Oh, there's a lot of societal needs where there are generations of showing the value in this sort of thing." When it comes, which in turn, as someone who's more libertarian, I say, "Well, yeah, then we should encourage gay people to get married because." There's tremendous value in single partner relationships and the value in that. It's obviously it's a you can open a can of worms very quickly with this sort of discussion on that. But it's
I actually,
like, why do we need the constant? Like, the reason why I was talking about the platypus affiliate society as being super interesting is so much of the left it wants to just throw out the Constitution, saying no, 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 we need to have a new document that aligns with our current society, or we need to have this. Like, I hate the living document doctrine when it comes to the Supreme Court's analysis of the U.S. Constitution, where it's no, we're just going to reinterpret it whatever way we want from generation to generation. I think that's a problem. I'm perfectly fine with us reforming it through amendments and things like that, which essentially make when you have a constitutional amendments, is kind of it. I'd never really clicked with me until a few years ago on this. Like, if you have an amendment to the Constitution, that's now part of the Constitution.
right.
Like anything that has been added to as an amendment to the Constitution is now part of the Constitution. So if you're going to throw out the Constitution, you got to throw away every amendment you've ever had. So if you want equal voting rights, things like that, guess what? You're going to rewrite the whole thing from scratch. You got to include all those too, because the amendments of the Constitution do not exist independent of the originating document. And it's I think that's just bad for society, especially with how toxic everything is right now. Now is the time we want to do that. It's like, come on,
Uh,
guys. I know these very intelligent people. I worked previously at UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law, which is really cool. I got to speak to a lot of very interesting people on both sides of the aisle when it comes to analysis of how our legal system works. And some of the people that would throw out these ideas like that, I'm like, guy, like you're realizing what you're opening up. Like
Yeah.
the cases that end up in front of the Supreme Court, I'm like, did you really think about what your argument was going to be before you brought this over? Like, I don't, there's been so many instances of that. Like, you really want to bring gun rights argument at all to the U.S. Supreme Court over the last several years, even before it switched entirely conservative? Like, you want the states to have those determining factors, not the Supreme Court where everything's going to be in stone forever.
Hmm. Yeah, I think, how do you feel about, so for example, the Platypus Affiliated Society? I don't know everything about their stances yet, but I personally am a fan of, I mean, I'm on the far left, right? So when I criticize, I think it's interesting when I criticize identity politics or cancel culture or so on, for me, it's not, oh, I'm a moderate, these people are too extreme left wing, right? For me, it's more like the liberals more towards the center get obsessed with these sorts of cultural issues because they don't have real goals in mind. They don't have real material goals in mind. And how do you feel about this rising sort of socialist left that also hates kind of the liberal excess?
I think I fundamentally disagree with socialism in any aspect of it entirely. Like I think there's a fund I've before anyone starts saying making this stupid argument that, well, you agree we should have government take care of the roads and things like that. It's like that's not socialism. There's a difference between socialism and public services that the government provides through consumer protection, everything like that. Full disclosure, I work for the state government for my full-time job. Go to my LinkedIn, you can see about it. I'm a PR guy. I work for the state
Member of
government. Like, exactly. Like it's I believe there's a role for people who are conservative and libertarian to work in the government to make sure things are going a certain way, just like in politics. Like you should get involved with politics. You should get, for me, it's the reason why I got involved with the media as much as I have problems with so much of the media is because I think it's important that the right voices are there to make sure things are going in the right direction. If you're not at the table, you don't have a say at the table.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so it's yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot what was your argument, your a
Yeah,
question that you're
so
asking?
my question was basically, how do you feel? Do you feel like, I guess maybe a better way to phrase it is, do you feel like there's any way to have an alliance between a socialist left that is critical of liberal left on maybe a lot of cultural issues, especially trivial cultural issues, with a conservative right that is critical, maybe not quite in the same way, but in a similar way?
In a way, yes. So, I mean, generally speaking, I think it's bad for the more liberal left and the socialist left to get too cozy with each other. I think there's a fundamental problem where they're very easily taken over by the more socialist side of it because there's a matter of empathy that I feel like the conservatives definitely lack. I mean, the whole leftist tiers model of the Daily Wire is entertaining, but it shouldn't be your entire political model. The reason why Biden was able to make the case coming at after taking over 3.5 years ago was he's the empathy versus the once again the orange middle finger that says screw you to everything, and we're gonna just go with right-wing populism. Like I think there's a problem with that. I don't see a way in for the most part for the socialist left and anyone on the right to really find too much in the middle. But big but the advantage to our American political system. I think it's awesome the way, once again, going back to why I think the constitutional system is great and it's the best political system in the world. I'm not saying our society is the best society in the world. It's a whole other thing. I think, for the most part, I do think that, but generally speaking, if we want to go into that argument, it's a totally different thing. But the reason why I think our U.S. constitutional system is so good is we're able to have that push and pull between both sides. And when the Congress is working correctly, it's not working correctly right now for countless reasons. Um, there's able to be that back and forth where in Congress they're able to make those determinations. And On top of that, another layer why it's even better than what happens in Congress is the nature of federalism, the nature of how our states have the ability to create their own laws, agencies, their own legislature, their own court system. As if there's something that's not determined by the feds, in my opinion, there should be as little of them as possible, and the states should have as much authority as they can muster. Whether it's to say, hey, we're not going to regulate this or we are going to regulate this. California can do whatever crazy stuff it wants to do as long as it doesn't impact the states, how other states operate.
Right.
Obviously, there are problems with that. You look at, for example, emissions, auto emissions and things like that. It's impossible to create a car just for California without there being significant financial impact to that industry. So guess what? California emissions ended up being the standard across the country secondhand because of that. And there have been a bunch of other laws. Another example of that is the TikTok bans that some states tried to do.
Right.
It's almost impossible for that to be a state level thing. It's going to have to be a federal level thing.
Okay.
But I mean, when you look at um I don't know why I would know so much about this. If you look at my LinkedIn, you'll figure out pretty quick. Insurance. There are aspects of insurance. It'd be great for it to be when it comes to private insurance. I'm not talking about Medicare, Medicaid, or possibility of single payer or anything like that. But the way our current insurance system works, the advantage of it is we're able to say, hey, New Hampshire doesn't want to have automobile insurance as a requirement. Then they could do that. Texas, wherever, can all have requirements. And you see how our society, which has here in New Hampshire, has a different way of thinking versus other states. Because guess what? Auto insurance is not required in the state, but it's one of the most, where we have one of the states with the most auto insurance uptake in the country. Like I've heard numbers that's in the low 90s. Meanwhile, in Florida, it's in the 60s where it's required.
That's
Like every group of people, and when there's so many people in the state, in the country, like it's 300 million people in the country or something like that. There's 1 million people in 1.16 million people here in New Hampshire, something to that effect. We're going to have very different norms for how we consider our day-to-day life and how it works, whether it's the nature of it's winter comes around, and guess what? We're going to act differently when that comes around. Our tourism industry is going to be very different. Maybe there's more religiosity in certain parts of the country than others. Maybe there's more caring about public works, and that's like the priority. We want to make sure that there's a certain level of social services that are provided more than somewhere else. I think federalism is the reason why this country has been able to hold together for all these years. We're recording the day after Independence Day, like perfect timing to talk about that. The nature of these states can all have their different thing and their different economies, is essential to keeping it together. You see the failures of, in my opinion, the European Union barely able to make it a few decades before there's just catastrophe, in my opinion, without that's going.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that's a point I think I can run with actually is the federalism point. Um, that's maybe an area where I would differ from a lot of the left, not necessarily federalism per se, but I am critical of the fact, like you said, we have 300 million people in this country. That's more people than most countries. That's more people than a lot of the countries we talk about. And a point that I bring up to the left is that a lot of the social democracies that the left idolizes, those are very small nation states with very
Very rich,
economies.
small nation states.
That's also
Like there's a lot of, you look at what's going on with Northern Europe and these countries that have these alleged utopian governments. They're funded by oil. Like they're able to make their
yeah,
money off of
it's
things they're able to pull from the ground to fund their society. It does not exist as this little independent thing. It's like, no, it's exports. That's where they're making all their money.
right, right. So I did want to note, right, that I have a point of agreement there with you about sort of decentralization, right? About I don't like that we have this enormous country where decisions are unaccountable. One point I make is the House of Representatives, right?
Hmm.
A lot of Democrats are talking about expanding the House, and that tends to be a relatively partisan disagreement, right? Democrats are in favor of expanding, Republicans are typically opposed to it. The problem that the Republicans would point out with expansion is it kind of dehumanizes the institution. It makes you no longer in-person deliberation. It's this very distant thing when you have 1,000 representatives or whatever, you know?
It's
But
also done from the left for political purposes, not necessarily because they think it's ethically the best thing to do. They want to have those votes from DC and these various other contingents around the country in order to sway the votes. The same thing with packing the court. It's funny how every time the conservative court makes a decision they don't like, they suddenly want to pack the court. But when when we had a very liberal Supreme Court up until recently, oh, that was never. It's like, no, it's perfect. Why would we want to touch this? This is great. We should enable this to have more power.
it's all liberals right now. Don't. Why are you talking about that?
Yeah.
Completely agree. And one of the things that I thought when I heard the case they were making for expanding the House, right? Because outside of the opportunistic case for expanding it, the sort of practical argument is that each representative is representing fewer people. They're more in touch with their constituencies. And I was like, okay, so I'm hearing from the right that if we expand it, the institution itself won't be able to meet up in person and deliberate. And I'm hearing from the left that if we expand it, they'll be more in touch with their constituencies. It sounds to me like the country's too big. That's what I'm hearing from both sides on this issue.
Yeah, and the bigger argument that really kills me is the discussions around the Senate, honestly, because the so much of the left just views it as an outdated model of legislating, and the nature of how it works is wrong because there's only two for each state. It's I think so much of the left is once again, it comes down to federalism. They hate federalism so much of the left. They want everything to be top-down controlled from Washington, D.C. By their own people. Like it's like they want to cut out as much of the people that are disagree with them. The right's just as guilty of this. I'm not gonna pretend otherwise. You see this especially at the state level when you're talking like Texas and things like that. It's all over the place. They want to pretend that some of the more left leaning jurisdictions don't matter. The
Right.
Republicans are just as guilty. You look at especially gerrymandering. It seems like conservatives have been a lot more effective at it, for better or worse, for how they want things set up. But the Senate's this outdated thing full of people that just hurts our systems. Like, no, it comes down to, once again, we have state governments. They're representing their state. They're not representing just their jurisdiction that they were voted on. They're representing their state. And this includes, in my opinion, the House of Representatives. This should also be considered at that level. Because guess what? Anything that comes out of the House has to be approved by the Senate. So it's a two segments of this same branch of our government, where the House needs to do a better job at understanding that, and I don't think they do because they're so distracted by the nature of politics nowadays. I think the Senate's hugely important because it takes it out of just straight up mob rule, and it comes down to more, okay, what does this part of the country, it's parliamentary is what it's referred to, and they have to have discussions because they're able to have discussions because there's not 1,000 of them in the room, because it's like it's
that
yeah.
That's the case Elizabeth Warren makes when she makes the case for the Senate, is that she loves the deliberative nature of it. She feels that it's a deliberative body, which is how she sort of makes the case for the Senate to progressives. And I definitely think that I agree with that. One interesting thing, I actually wrote an essay about the formation of the states and the nature of the shapes and sizes of the states, because one of my criticisms, and I don't even know if it's really that much of a criticism, of federalism is that the units we're delegating to, right? If we think of federalism as the federal government does some stuff, but it also has a delegation of legal authority down to the states, right? The units that we have subdivided a country into are somewhat arbitrary. They happen for historical reasons that were a long time ago that no longer exist. one essayist in The Breakdown of Nations, one of my favorite authors, Leopold Kohr, actually wrote that the California and oh, it looks like we got 10 minutes left to record, but so I guess we'll finish this up pretty soon. California and Texas, because they're such large states, they end up dominating politics and conversation, right? So he argued for breaking those up. So there's a lot of change, I think, that needs to be made to the states themselves. Another argument I wrote from every perspective I could find. I found how many cultures are there, right? Because some people, you said some places are more religious, right? So I found a cultural ethnographer who wrote that there are fundamentally 11 different unique cultures in the United States, and they don't really align with the existing state borders, but they are different from one another. And then I found Parag Khanna, who is I think he calls himself a connectographer, which is an interesting term. But he talks about trade and trade routes and where trade concentrates and how it spreads. And he showed that our economic networks of trade across the United States align into 7 big hubs and their surrounding regions. And one of his arguments was to do away with the states and replace them with 7 economic regions and have that be the devolution.
I honestly I disagree with that fundamentally because I believe there are cultural norms within how a lot of our states are set up that are very different with even with just how it currently stands. Sure, maybe there are some regions, but specifically someone who's a New Englander, I mean, good God, we're so much different. You cross over that border into Massachusetts, you feel it.
That's
The way they get along. If I go down to Salem and I see all the Massachusetts plates and I'm interacting with these people just around like restaurants and stores and stuff and like that, I'm like just doesn't seem right. It seems different. As someone who grew up in central Maine, I mean, the mentality around politics and culture and everything is so much different. It's so much. I mean, the reason why I'm very isolationist when it comes to foreign politics is definitely bred out of my rural Maine roots and where I came from. Generally speaking, politically, I agree a lot more with the more live free or die mentality of New Hampshire. Is the reason why it was a great fit for me to essentially move down here in 2006 when I
sort
went to
of
college.
paleo,
It's
libertarian, that sort of.
yeah, and then the libertarian is perfect. Like, there's a meld of some of the main stuff that kind of definitely goes well with here. But when you go over to Vermont, it's a totally different can of worms. Like the crunchy granola guys, but they still have the same sort of outdoorsy pro hunting mentality that Massachusetts doesn't have. It's fascinating, and I think it's just the nature of how we've had these little bubbles for so many hundreds of years at this point, even when there were colonies, where that just doesn't go away that quickly. And the so much to the left with their desire to go to a central government setup and remove as much federalism as possible is going to breed so much more chaos than they could possibly imagine. I mean, maybe, yeah, there are regional aspects, but nothing lives in a black and white. So eventually, the way we have our states is we're able to have that gradient between how the people on the seacoast meld over to the White Mountain region of the state where it's very, very different and rural. And then from there, meld further over into Vermont. And then you look down I mean, New York is probably the greatest example of an individual state having different bubbles. And you go from New York City to the upstaters that can be kind of outdoorsy, some of that. And then you go over to Rochester and the bitter cold winters and the impact that has on them. Like, but they find a balance in Albany somehow, which is fascinating. I think this goes much deeper than politics and economics. This is once again going more at the conservative side of of my own personal ideology is the traditionalism aspect of it, and I think the traditions of these bubbles are so much deeper than any of that.
I think that you're right that there's something to that. Interestingly enough, most of the political authors that I gravitated towards when I first got into politics happened to be, or maybe not so happened to be, maybe it was culturally ingrained in my core, very sort of unheard of people who were writing specifically about Vermont and New Hampshire. The people I gravitated towards were Frank M. Bryan, the Vermont secessionist movement, and Murray Bookchin, who comes out of Vermont, who is almost an anarchist, sort of a leftist, but from a Vermont specific perspective, he has that very rural yet somehow very far left crunchy granola in the living in the
Yeah.
hills thing rooted in every single political stance he has.
And it's funny you say there's been so many, I've met so many Midwesterners for some reason that have moved to New Hampshire and especially the academic side of the house. And they just fit right in, the Michiganders and such. I've either they went to college out there, they went to University of Michigan, or they just migrated here and they fit right in, as opposed to the Californians that always kind of feel like outsiders. Like they love it, but it's always this barrier. It's like is this really what the way I feel? That's the opinion I get out of a lot of them.
Absolutely. So I think we're running out of time right now for this interview, but I think I'm going to want to have you on again sometime if you'd be interested. And
Definitely.
for now, I just hope everyone in the audience checks out the New England Take. And is there anything else you'd like to plug for people to check out?
Yeah, find me on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. newenglandtake.com is my website. I post everything there, and YouTube channel is the biggest thing I push. So look for New England Take
I just checked
on
that out.
there.
Great channel.
Thanks, appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, AJ. Have a nice day.
Thanks, you too.